Welcome to our project presentation. Our project is called Say All Fast, a Minute Every Day Shuffled SAFMEDS. Our presenters are Taylor, Savannah, Nadia, Caitlin, and Stacy. The topic is study replication using SAFMEDS to gain fluency in vocabulary terms. The original study is titled A Case Study Using SAFMEDS to Promote Fluency with Skinner's Verbal Behavior Terms by Stockwell and Eschliman in 2010. They conducted a study implementing Lindsley's SAFMEDS intervention and using Skinner's analysis of verbal behavior vocabulary definitions. The purpose of their study was to identify whether SAFMEDS intervention was an effective tool in increasing one graduate student's verbal repertoire. Using a deck of 60 cards, the learner would see the definition on one side of the card and say the term printed on the back. A response emitted was either a correct or not yet response, depending on if the learner got the definition correct or incorrect. The fluency aim was 40 correct and 2 or less not yet responses in 1 minute.
So the original study consisted of a girl who was also a graduate student of ABA. She worked toward her PhD and she was only 28 years old. The materials that she used, she had a set of 60 vocabulary words. So she had a set of 60 flashcards. These vocabulary words were from her verbal behavior class. She used a battery-operated timer and had a fluency data sheet. She had a daily per minute standard acceleration chart, which is not commonly used in everyday ABA practice. We did change this part of the original study during our replication, so we worked with our professor to choose a changing criterion design for our replication. The study she used, or the setting that she used when she was practicing, was a quiet room in her home, most likely her bedroom. The design of the original study was an ABA design. As I stated earlier, we did change this part to a changing criterion design, so the graphs we'll see later in the presentation will be a changing criterion format instead of an ABA format.
So each session for our base, so the method of this session, so we started off with baseline. Before each time session, the learner did an untimed session. During the untimed session, the learner looked over each card and emitted a response that was either correct or not yet. For all not yet responses, that card was placed on a separate pile. All not yets are reviewed additional times before starting the timed session. Before the timed sessions, the deck was shuffled and a 1-minute timer was started. During the timed session, the learner sat upright. For each card that was on top of the deck, a vocal response was made. This card was then flipped over to see if it was correct. Cards were either placed in a correct or not yet pile, and this pattern continued until the timer went off. The learner did SAFMEDS for 10 days and completed 1 to 6 timings each day. At the end of 1 minute, responses were entered in on a frequency data sheet. Data was entered in for a number of correct responses, not yet, and also the date, length, and location of the timing were recorded, as well as the total number of responses and the percent of correct. The learner then plotted the number of correct and not yet on the standard acceleration chart. If multiple timings were conducted on one day, she picked the timing with the highest numbers of correct to plot. If multiple timings with the same amount occurred, then the timing with the lowest number of not yets were used.
Okay, so the results showed that the learner was successful at achieving the criterion level of 40 correct responses and 2 or fewer not yets. She increased her correct vocabulary words from 16 words per minute to 44 per minute, and her not yets from 4 words per minute to 0 per minute. Also, there were multiple follow-up sessions at 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and 11 weeks later, showing that she continued on with 32 correct, 1 not correct, 40 correct, and 0 not correct. 42 correct and 0 not yet, and then 34 and 1 not yet, showing that once the intervention was terminated, she maintained her fluency skills with the vocabulary words.
The limitations for the study, the differences in SAFMEDS characteristics and stimulus control. So a learner may attend to irrelevant stimulus features, and the learners continue to practice terms within and outside of the academic course. Also, another limitation was the C phrase, say term, was effective, but there's no guarantee that fluent responding occurs in the reverse order. So C term, say phrase.
Okay, so that brings us to our first supporting piece of literature we found. And this was by Ogden R. Lindsley, called Precision Teaching, Discoveries and Effects, from 1992. Lindsley developed a precision teaching tool in the late 70s known as SAFMEDS to help students increase their frequency skills, both in accuracy and speed, with concepts or definitions. Once again, SAFMED stands for Say All Fast, a Minute Every Day Shuffled. Lindsley stated that precision teaching is basing educational decisions on changes in continuous self-monitoring performance frequencies displayed on a standard acceleration chart, and the decisions are made by the learner. Precision teaching has been a successful tool used to teach children, college students, and adults with and without disabilities. Precision teaching in SAFMEDS uses simplified tools and methods such as monitoring frequency daily, self-recordings, and standard charting tools as an academic intervention. According to Lindsley, while using SAFMEDS as an intervention to achieve fluency, other skills such as longer retention, greater endurance, greater generalization to application, performance aims for teaching, and standards for aims and evaluations are also required. These performance results are known as the acronym BREEPs. Lastly, Lindsay reported that whenever precision teaching has been used, it has almost always doubled students' learning at a medium cost per teacher per year, no higher than $90, which was done in the 90s. So things have changed.
All right, so for our second supporting literature, we wanted to show some further support for the SAFMEDS method from one of its early designers. The article is called The 4 Free Operant Freedoms. It was published in a journal called The Behavior Analyst in 1996. So this source is a little outdated, but it demonstrated a lot of concepts that are behind the theory of why SAFMEDS is effective. This article is more of a review than research findings. It was written by Lindsley as well. In it, Lindsley talks about free operant conditioning. This term was coined by B.F. Skinner and is now more commonly known as free responding. The quote I included here from the article says, "The experimental organism is free to respond at any time." And I think that's an interesting way to think about learning. We're all free responding organisms. We are free to participate in learning and free to learn what we want to. So Lindsley uses this article to explain to readers the 4 free operant freedoms. He states that learners are free to present their own stimuli. They are free to form responses. They are free to repeat responses as many times as they need to master a concept, and they are free to speed through their responses. Lindsley presents the theory that SAFMEDS is a good study technique because of the 4 free operant freedoms of human behavior. He supports SAFMEDS because when using SAFMEDS, the learners are free to present stimuli at their own pace, so you're free to go at your own speed. Learners can make their own learning materials. You make your own deck of flashcards. Learners can choose their own content, so you get to choose what you want to learn. Learners are free to repeat responses until the content is mastered, and they are free to speed through the deck at their own pace. Lindsley used SAFMEDS in graduate level courses that he was teaching at the time that he wrote the article. He found that students were twice as fast if they presented their own stimuli than if another student held the deck of cards. Students who also created their own decks of cards were less likely to lose them. He tried one semester to provide students with decks of cards to work on their SAFMEDS technique one semester, but a lot of them lost their decks. So SAFMEDS cards are really time consuming to make. So if you make them yourself, you'll be a lot more responsible with them. So to summarize, Lindsley supports SAFMEDS because of the theory of the 4 free operant freedoms and his own practical experience.
So my study was titled, "What's the probability of that? Using SAFMEDS to increase undergraduate success with statistical concepts." So Beverly et al. In 2009 wanted to increase first-year undergraduate psychology students' performance on basic statistics facts and statistical definitions. Researchers were interested to see if the SAFMEDS procedure would build fluency and increase complex learning for the participants of this study. Researchers tested whether the SAFMEDS procedure would help students become fluent in the definitions needed for their statistics class. So there were 55 first-year psychology undergraduate students that participated in this study, and they earned course credit for participating in the study as well. Students were put in either a precision teaching group, PT group, or a treatment as usual group, TAU group. The PT group used the SAFMEDS cards and used precision teaching techniques to measure their progress. The PT group had an initial 1-hour tutoring session in which they learned how to use the SAFMEDS cards and learn how to use precision teaching methods to track their progress. The PT group was instructed to complete the SAFMEDS procedure 3 times per day and only plot their best score from that day on a standard acceleration chart. So the study did also use a standard acceleration chart. Data was taken over the course of the semester, and a post-test was given at the end of the semester. Overall, researchers found that the PT group improved almost an entire grade level by the end of the semester when compared to the TAU group. There was a significantly higher mean score as well when looking at the post-test for the PT group, again, when compared to the TAU group. So overall, the students who completed the SAFMEDS ended the semester with a higher overall grade level compared to the students who did not complete the SAFMEDS study.
So the article that I found was called "Developing Behavior Fluency with Movement Cycles Using SAFMEDS" by Kubina, Urick, Durek, and Healy, written in 2016. So this study had a couple of questions that it was trying to figure out. The first one was they wanted to see if SAFMEDS could be used for those who have a job in service. The specific areas were behavior analysts and special education teachers. This study specifically wanted to see if SAFMEDS could lead to fluency for correctly identifying movement cycles for behavior analysts and special education teachers. A movement cycle is a precision teaching term that refers to a behavior with a clearly observable movement and distinct beginning and end. The next question the study examined is if SAFMEDS as an intervention could produce positive outcomes with maintenance after the intervention was concluded. There were 8 participants, and each was either in education or behavioral health. All participants had a master's degree in ABA, special education, or psychology. 5 out of the 8 were BCBAs or becoming BCBAs during the study. The participants were also involved in jobs in which they had to label or pinpoint behavior frequently.
Okay. So oh, sorry.
It's okay. The study was conducted at a private school located in the eastern part of the United States of America. The school provided services to children ages 3 to 21 with a diagnosis of autism. Experimental sessions took place in an office location that had a table, desk, chairs, and other office supplies. Practice sessions took place during the participants' no more work days and occurred at different times throughout the day. The dependent variable was correctly labeling SAFMEDS cards. A correct response was given when the participant set the specific movement cycle given to the card. The independent variable was increasing frequency in relation to a criterion. A multiple probe, multiple baseline across participants' design was used. During baseline, all participants completed one trial, which was a 20-second timing, each day on the deck given to them for 4 consecutive days. All of the other participants did a weekly probe baseline until intervention was started. When the criteria of 10 correct responses in 20 seconds with less than 1 error across 4 consecutive data points was reached, then the intervention could be started. Intervention included daily frequency building or practice with the assigned SAFMEDS desk, and this was done each day at work. Results concluded that SAFMEDS as an intervention could produce behavior fluency and also did produce strong positive outcomes with maintenance once the intervention was finished.
Okay, so another supporting literature we found was titled Increasing High School Students' Math Skills with the Use of SAFMEDS Class-Wide. In 2016, Hunter, Beverly, Parkinson, and Hughes conducted a study in the United Kingdom examining the use of SAFMEDS in a high school setting, targeting basic math skills across a whole class. There's evidence that many students reach high school without the basic math skills they should have acquired in primary school. Specifically, in 2012, in the United Kingdom, only 33% of students achieved above a B grade for the General Certificate of Secondary Education in math. This is a major concern since math skills are critical skills used daily. Another concern the authors had were that there was little to no research assessing the effectiveness of the use of SAFMEDS on a class-wide basis with a mainstream high school population. The purpose of this study was to evaluate the use of SAFMEDS to teach math skills across a whole high school class. The participants in the study were 48 high school students, 21 male and 27 female between the ages of 11 and 12. They used SAFMEDS cards that were based on percentages of money, a data sheet to record daily responses. They also used a chart to graph best timings, a pencil, and a timer to use for each session. The settings were conducted in the students' classroom during their math sessions. And the behavioral definition was the fluency aim of 40 correct responses and 2 or less incorrect per minute. The method of the study, they conducted a pre-test, a post-test, and a 1-month follow-up. And then the groups received 30 minutes of math instruction, followed by an additional 20 minutes of completing the SAFMEDS session. The same procedure as the original SAFMEDS study that we conducted with the original, but then these students were allowed 4 timings per day, and they were able to select one of the best score for the day to enter into their charts. The results indicated that using SAFMEDS in addition to students' math lessons increased basic math skills compared to just the math classes alone. Results also showed that skills were maintained at a 1-month follow-up. The application quiz showed that students could also transfer the information they learned to real-world math problems. Lastly, the study claimed that it was able to demonstrate another learning outcome, which they called stability. And this is when the SAFMEDS intervention was not conducted in a quiet one-on-one environment. It was done in the natural, real-life environment of a classroom. Some of the limitations of the study assessed were the size of the study were relatively small. There was continued exposure and practicing of the skills outside of the SAFMED practice time. Time they reported is always almost a guarantee to learning and fluency, and also the social validity of the intervention was not measured. They did say, though, however, 90% of the students were in favor of continuing on with the SAFMEDS once the treatment was over. In conclusion, the following study was able to provide evidence that supports SAFMEDS as an intervention that increases basic math skills to a classified mainstream high school.
The next study that was done was an examination of stimulus control and fluency-based strategies, comparing SAFMEDS and generalization. The participants in the study were 1 male and 5 female graduate students, and they were all enrolled in a 10-week course. So the materials used, there were 2 sets of flashcards, 45 total term and definition pairs, and then 2 different formats on the sets of flashcards. Also timers, and then an internet timer was used, and it visually displayed a countdown display, and it sounded a loud tone when the timer reached 0. The setting took place in a university classroom, and they met once a week. The behavioral definition was the correct definition presented vocally by the student and printed on the card. The method of the study was each student received a new set of training cards on the 1st, 4th, and 7th days of the study. And so the generalization training took place on the 3rd, 6th, and 9th days. So on the training days, each student was given approximately 15 minutes of training and had individual and paired time sessions. On the testing days, they had 1 paired session with the same cards. And then after that session, they were given another set of cards with the same definition, but it was in a different format. So the results of the study were that the time it took for students to complete the training and generalization differed, and during the generalization testing, the fluency rate decreased for the majority of the students in the study. So some of the limitations in the study were that the students were allowed to take the flashcards home after each class. So if some of the students practice at home, it's unknown. Another limitation was using a count-up timer instead of a countdown timer. So the conclusion of the study is that the fluency-based instructional strategies, they may facilitate generalization to an extent, but it may be very minimal.
So moving on to the project, the purpose of our study was to show that a learner using the precision teaching approach known as Say All Fast, a minute every day shuffled SAFMEDS could establish a fluent interverbal repertoire that is related to the subject matter. And in this case, we used vocabulary terms from our course.
All right, so next we're going to talk about the methods of our project. So we had 5 participants, Caitlin, Nadia, Savannah, Taylor, and myself. The setting we used was a quiet room in our home. The materials that we used, we each created a deck of 60 vocabulary cards consisting of vocabulary words from this class, SPCE 611. We used a timer. Most of us use the timer app on our phones, and a pen and a pencil, a frequency data sheet, a treatment fidelity checklist that we created, a computer with Excel to make a change in criterion graph, and video recording equipment. We all used our computers to make the videos. The design of the study was a change in criterion design. The operational definition of the behavior we targeted was using a deck of 60 vocabulary cards from SPCE 611. The learner will verbalize up to 40 correct responses in 1 minute. We set a goal of 2 or less incorrect responses in 1 minute. For our data collection, we used frequency data. The data was on incorrect and correct responses. So each session, we did 2 untimed and 2 timed recordings for 1 minute. We took the frequency data on the timed sessions. We used the frequency data sheet to enter the number incorrect and the number correct. Then we took those numbers and graphed them in Excel. Inter-observer agreement data was taken for 25% of our sessions, and treatment fidelity data was collected on 2 sessions per participant. We took this data by recording ourselves performing a session and sending it to our reliability partners. So this next slide shows an example of our data collection sheet. You can see we recorded the day of the week, the calendar date, the number correct, number incorrect or not yet, and our total responses. We calculated a percentage correct And we included an observer column for when we did our IOA and treatment fidelity sessions.
So our baseline phase, we started collecting data on October 1st and continued until a stable rate of responding was reached. We each performed a time session without a previously untimed session. During each time session, we sat upright holding a deck of cards in our left hand and flipped with our right. If one of us was predominantly left-handed, then we held the cards in our right hand and then we flipped with our left. We looked at the definitions on the front of the cards and we emitted a vocal response, and then we flipped the card over to see if we were correct. We then placed cards in a correct pile or a not yet pile. Cards could be placed and not yet if we were incorrect or if we skipped a card. We continued this manner until the 1-minute timer went off and stopped. Next, we counted the pile of correct cards and not yet cards, and we recorded these numbers in the correct columns on the data sheet. We also included the date, length, total number of responses, and the percent of correct responding for that timing on the data sheet. After this, we then went to plot the number of correct responses from the best timing on our changing criterion graph on Excel. We continued this procedure until a steady rate of responding was achieved, and then we could start the intervention phase.
The intervention phase consisted of an untimed session and a timed session. So for the untimed session, we put the cards in a correct pile and not yet pile. And then once we did that with all the cards, we read all the incorrect responses, and then we would shuffle the deck and begin the time session part. We would set our timer for 1 minute, and by looking at the definition, the learner will emit a vocal response, and then we would put the cards in the correct and not correct piles. At the end of the 1 minute, we would count the number we had correct and the number in the not yet pile, and we would enter that response on our frequency data sheet, and then we would enter the correct responses on a changing criterion design graph in Excel.
Okay, next up we have is our IOA. So the way we collected our IOA data was that each participant recorded 9 video sessions across 4 different days. The sessions were ourselves implementing the SAFMEDS interventions. The videos were then sent to another study participant who recorded the data by calculating the amount of correct and incorrect responses. And the IOA data that we used was using a total count IOA, which was the smaller count divided into the larger count multiplied by 100. And then IOA was calculated for about 25% of our sessions in every phase. And then the next slide is an example of the IOA data sheet that we used. And this is an example of mine. So I'm the learner, Nadia Hayford, and it breaks it down into our definition, the formula we used, and then I was the primary data collector. So if you see, let's see, the top one would be 1017. I recorded that I got 26 correct and 2 incorrect. And Caitlin was observed and watched my video and recorded that I indeed got the 26 correct and the 2 incorrect. So our IOA was at about 100%. After we all analyzed all of our data sheets, overall our group calculated 100% of IOA data across all 9 sessions.
The next to discuss is our treatment fidelity. So for our project, each participant recorded 2 video sessions on different days. The video was then sent to another participant in the study, and this happened to be the same person who watched the IOA data. The reliability partner used the data sheet checklist we created to take treatment fidelity data. The checklist included the procedural steps to ensure that they were completed correctly. And that person watching the video would either mark in the yes column or the no column whether the person got that procedural step correctly or incorrectly. Our treatment fidelity formula was reliability partner used a data sheet checklist to take treatment fidelity data. So our treatment fidelity for the untimed sessions where you put cards in correct and not yet piles. You reread all the incorrect responses that were put in the not yet pile. You then shuffle the deck of cards and move into the time session. You then set a timer for 1 minute. Looking at the definition, the learner will emit a vocal response and either put the card in a correct or incorrect pile, determining whether or not they got the response correct or incorrect. At the end, they will count the number of correct and not yet responses when the 1 minute timer goes off. They will enter correct responses on a frequency data sheet. They will enter correct responses on a changing criterion design graph in Excel. For our group, out of 10 sessions, we all maintained 100% treatment fidelity. So here is an example of our treatment fidelity data sheet. As you can see, it has a column for yes and no, and is divided up into untimed sessions and timed sessions. And we mark down either yes or no, depending on if we got the procedural step correct or incorrect. And as I pointed out, we got 100% treatment fidelity for all of our sessions.
So next, we've included our graphs to show you what they look like. So I'm Caitlin, and this is my graph. And so at my baseline, my average was 11.3, and it ranged from 6 to 14. And you can see it stayed pretty stable, and it ranged, the stability was around 14 to 16. And then I moved forward to my next criterions, and I had 5 criterions, and they had an increment of 5. I started with the goal of 40, and I did end up getting 40 right at the very end. And so for my final criterion, criterion 5, my average was 32.4, and I had a range of 25 to 40.
So this is my graph, and so my baseline average was 3.8, and the range was between 2 and 5. I reached 5 on day 5, and so my criterions went up by 5. I had 5 criterions, and so I started with the goal of 5 and then ended with the goal of 40. I did not reach 40 by the end of the study. And then so for my final criterion, my average was 27.3, and then the range was 26 to 30 at the end.
Okay, and this is my graph, Nadia. My baseline average was 9.6, and then my baseline range was 9 and 10. So then I was able to move on. And it took me about 6 criterions to reach the goal of 40, and by moving up by 5. However, I started with a goal of 10. It says 5, but it should say 10 since I already achieved 10, and then moved up by 5. And the end goal was 40 like the rest of us, and I did reach 40, and it looks like in my final criterion, I had an average of 36.4 with a range of 34 to 42.
All right, so this is my results. I'm Stacy. I had a baseline average of 6.4. It ranged between 6 and 7. I went through 6 criterions, which increased by 5. I started with a goal of 5 and ended with a goal of 40, but I did not reach 40. My final criterion was criterion 6. My average was 30.5, and my range was 26 to 35. You can see in my graph, it took me a really long time, and I kind of just stayed in criterion 6 and just kind of stabilized in that 30 to 35 range.
I'm Taylor, and this is my results. My baseline average was 5. My baseline range was 2 to 8. I only had 4 criterions. I started with an increment of 5 and started with a goal of 5 as well. My end goal was of 40. However, I was one of the 3 participants who did not reach 40. Overall, for my final criterion, my criterion 4 average was 25.15, and my range for criterion 4 was 21 to 28. Overall, I had an increasing trend line, but did not reach the goal of 40.
So some limitations that we discussed about our project was the note cards that we used. Some of us printed out the cards and glued them onto index cards to make them thicker, and this was determined to be a better method than just plain slips of paper, because those thin pieces of paper are hard to flip over. Another limitation was our work schedules. This influenced how many sessions we could complete in a day. The time of day influenced our response rates. If it was late at night, we tended to score lower. Family obligations also interfered with study time. Other classes and studying and doing projects for other classes interfered with our data collection and our time that we could spend on the study. The graph and the design of the study were also limitations. It presented difficulty because the original study was an ABA design and used a standard acceleration chart, but we ended up switching over to a changing criterion design and graph for our replication, which changed our original plan. We felt that we memorized the format rather than the definitions. We feel like we would not be able to generalize the terms that we learned from the cards to other environments and stimuli because we seem to memorize the format rather than the actual definitions. We also felt that the number of cards was a limitation. So we had 70 some cards that we had to learn. And we think if we were to do it again, we would stick with about 40 cards, which was our goal.
So our conclusion, we had an outcome goal of 40 correct responses, and since the original study also had an outcome goal of 40 correct responses. In general, our group agrees that it was an effective method in increasing fluency. However, after 35 sessions, only 2 of us reached the overall goal of 40 correct responses. Our group thought it might be more effective if, in the future, the total number of vocabulary word cards used matched the overall goal of correct responses. So as we pointed out, we had 60 or 70 cards total, but a goal of 40. So in the future, we would want the number of cards to match our goal. Lastly, here is our contribution log and our references.